And we're going to close the morning session with a very special guest here. I've got the honor of introducing my friend and colleague, Bob Woodruff. Bob did ask me to keep it clean. Bob has been a journalist for more than 25 years, best known for his national news coverage on ABC, the best network. At the end of 2005, he was named as the new anchor for World News Tonight, replacing Peter Jennings. Life was very good for Bob and for his wife, Lee, and for their family. Little did they know what awaited them in fairly quick order. In early 2006, Bob was reporting on location in Iraq regarding U.S. and Iraqi security forces for ABC's World News Tonight. He was seriously injured when a roadside bomb went off and struck his vehicle. In a miraculous recovery, at least we call it miraculous, I'm sure it seemed longer to you, but 13 months, Bob returned to ABC News. With To Iraq and Back, Bob Woodruff reports. Since then, he's reported from around the globe on a variety of subjects for the network, but often on veterans' stories and events and issues. He was honored with a Peabody Award for his reporting on traumatic brain injury. In his best-selling memoir, In an Instant, co-authored with his wife, Lee, he shares stories about the fragility of life, the strength of family, and the bravery of those who helped save him. So we're honored today to have him with us. Please welcome Michigan's Bob Woodruff.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Stephen, for that, keeping it clean. Very well done. Better than you do on live television, I'm sure. It's great to get back here to Michigan. It's true that I grew up here in Birmingham for all those years. Born in 1961, lived through the whole days of the Vietnam, where our neighborhoods were all filled with those veterans during that time. Of course, it's a very different world for it. You know, I do come from a military family in the sense of my grandfather. He was Army, World War I. And I told a couple people here today that almost the strange coincidence or irony, whatever it may be, is that my grandfather was a medic in Walter Reed in World War I. Who would have known that his grandson, who did not join the military, that he would be ending up in Bethesda Naval right next door where the medics were saving my life. My grandfather, too, so he was in the Army. World War II rolls around, and he wants to join back to the Army, World War II, but he was too old. So what did he do? He joined the Coast Guard. And he was on Coast Guard in the Great Lakes, keeping all the Nazis from coming in from Canada. And then my father ended up being drafted into the Army for the Korean War. And then he came back, and he always told us when we were little kids, when we were 3, 4, 5 years old, he used to tell us that he was killed in the war, which we still, Dad, wait, you're alive. We don't get it. That's the way he talked about the war days for him. But I also found out that they would make all sorts of, I saw it here today, Jeff making jokes about the Marines and then the Navy and the Air Force and all that. The Army's the strongest, right? My father used to do that all the time too. He used to joke about the Navy, and the Marines. The Marines are just a department of the Navy. They're not even their own. And I said, yeah, but they always tell me they're the men's department. I also have a little amazing last night. Maybe again this is a strange coincidence, but. I don't get back here to Detroit, Michigan a lot enough. My father still lives here in the same house we grew up in. Another brother lives in Ann Arbor as a carpenter there. And another brother who runs the media part of Bloomberg right here in Detroit. And I don't get here enough, but it's kind of weird. Last night I got this email from my little daughter, Catherine, who's 21 years old now. She just graduated out of Boston College. And she just took her job here in Detroit. She's moving here to Detroit to work with a startup company called Bonza, about pasta. So if she could live in any of your houses for free, that'd be fantastic, if you don't mind. The other thing, listen, Eminem's from 8 Mile. I'm from 16 Mile, so I'm twice as good as he is. But I also got the chance to go to Michigan Law School, which is the most huge, changing part of my life. So I'll just tell you, I know you know all the facts about hiring veterans, so I'll just tell you some stories, then I'll talk to you about my story because I love myself. But I remember life has changed so many times for all of us. You know, I was there in Michigan Law School back in between 1984 and 1987. And it was at that time when China was changing and changing the world. I remember seeing it on the Deng Xiaoping on the front cover of the Time magazine, Newsweek, and I see this country is really going to be the next big, powerful part in the world. So I started studying Chinese when I was in law school at Michigan, because University of Michigan has some of the most, Chinese history and education in our country. So at the end of that, when I graduated after in '87, I went and became a M&A lawyer in New York, literally 2 weeks before the market completely collapsed. It went down 22% on that single day in 1987 in October, and since I was doing M&A, there were no more merging, there was no more acquiring. So I went to my law firm and I said, listen, I'm going to go and take a year off. I'm going to go to China and teach American law, international law, to young Chinese students who for the first time were getting to learn much more about the West. And I got a job within 3 days from my good friends, my Chinese friends from Michigan Law School. And so I did, and my wife and I, we got married on 9/11, 1988, and 2 days later, we moved over to China. And I guess it was kind of a real test, almost like maybe a military test for my wife to put up what I was just putting her through. This was a time we were the first Westerners, non-Chinese, living in this dorm of this university. Like literally, there were just holes in the floor. No showers except in the middle of the campus. It was a completely different world, and she somehow stuck with me for all of this time. But I remember the first time I gave a real big speech to the young lawyers that were over there, the Chinese students, and a room filled about 400 people like this. And at the end of my talk about American law, international law, I said, any questions you have, put them on little pieces of little cards, and asked them. So they've handed up these cards to me. There was no questions about law or anything about that. There's things like, who's your favorite celebrity? What kind of car did you drive back there in America? And then the question was the best one. They said, okay, if your mother and your wife are drowning in a river, but you can only save one, which one would you save? And I knew something about the culture, and I said, well, I would save my mother, because I can always get another wife. It was a huge standing ovation from the whole crowd. Yes, I won. I wish I'd stayed in China all that time. But anyway, at the end of that year, Tiananmen Square massacre happened. And yet again, another major change in my life. We witnessed all of that. I was hired by all my students stopped going to class. So I had nothing else to do. I had only one Western friend, because I lived on the campus with all my students. But he was a CBS sound man, and he said, now that you're not teaching anymore, would you want to come on and be like a fixer for us? I could speak Chinese somewhat, not great, but I could. And get him around as a fixer, to get him all around town to do little interviews with the peoples on the streets. And that, of course, changed my life. I came back, moved back to California, went down to the San Francisco bureau office of the same firm. And 2 more years, the Gulf War broke out in 1991. And I remember sitting there doing these legal paperwork there, and all I wanted to do was turn to that television and see all that reporting coming out of Kuwait and Iraq. And I said, that's what I want to do. So literally about a month and a half after our son, Mac, was born, in 1991, I took like a 95% pay cut to go become a journalist. And it's been the road ever since. So after that happened, I moved around. My wife and I, by the way, have been, in our first 13 years of marriage, we lived in 10 cities. Very military as well. The last 13 years, we lived in New York. So we've actually been married almost 27 years. And she has not dumped me yet, shockingly. And we have 4 kids. But so we came back into journalism, moved up, hired by ABC. And all I wanted to do was get on the road again and cover the world. It was the end of the Cold War, and I think a lot of people within the network itself were saying, are you sure you want to go overseas? We're not doing as much foreign reporting now because the Cold Wars have wound it down. You know, after 1995 in Bosnia, that kind of came to an end. Certainly, China had already changed significantly. The Soviet Union was not really the threat to us anymore. So there was not as much reporting. I said, something big's going to happen. And of course, then it was Yugoslavia, Milosevic. All of that started to unravel. And then, of course, while we're living we're based in London for ABC. And in 2001, I'll never forget that moment. I was sitting in my office, and one of the guys in the rim of our office, right there, just yards down the hall, said, "Do you see what just happened?" I said, "Did you see that plane? Looks like a Cessna or something. Went into one of the towers in New York City." I said, "What?" We came out there and started watching it. So that's bizarre. Next thing you know, right there, the second one hits. We all turned to each other and we said, "You know what? That's Osama bin Laden. We've been studying him for 2 years." We all looked at each other. Within the next 4 hours, I had to get my stuff together, say goodbye to my wife and my 4 kids. And then we took off at the very last British Air flight from London to Islamabad in Pakistan. And for the next 17 straight weeks, we reported out of there, trying to get into Afghanistan, which we could not get in until October 7th, when finally we went in as a force to try to find Osama bin Laden. And so we were there. And I'll never forget how reporting was beginning to change. Is that finally, after those 17 weeks, had to go back again. Finally, I was heading out to try to go back to London and spend some time with my wife and my kids, and I got a call while on the way out, and they said, ABC was on the phone, they said, "Listen, you got to get back to Pakistan." Because Daniel Pearl, who was a reporter for a Wall Street Journal, had been kidnapped. "You got to go back to Pakistan." I said, "Oh, I don't want to," "all right, but I don't have a visa. I can't go in." They said, "Well, we got your visa." Back to Pakistan, cover that again. I know sometimes people tell them about covering wars, is leading up to that time, I think a lot of the so-called enemies that we were covering, they didn't want to kidnap us and kill us. They wanted to give their message to us almost so they could make their point. That completely changed. After Daniel Pearl was kidnapped and then, of course, assassinated, we knew that what the real tactic is within those insurgents was to actually put a message to our country that no matter where you are or who you are, we will get you. And we know that changed the coverage in this world. We actually, at Disney, we just do not want to go into Syria country, for example. Anywhere you got ISIF forces, anywhere. We don't want to go near it because there's really no safety. You can take the risk, but not many people do. And all of that began to change, even back then. And then I'll tell you the story about another thing that really completely changed my life, and really to now be doing what I think is the most satisfying part of my life ever, was to do everything we can for the veterans. The same thing you are as those are giving them jobs, but for those that have gone through some wounds, whether visible or invisible, in these wars. But it began this way, is that in 2006, as Stephen said, I was appointed to take over for Peter Jennings, who died of lung cancer, to anchor World News Tonight, along with Elizabeth Vargas as co-anchors of the show. And so the first really gigantic story was the State of the Union by President Bush back at the end of January 2006. And his message was that the U.S. military is going to start passing over the power and the responsibility from the U.S. military to the Iraqi military. So she would report from the State of the Union out of Washington, D.C., and I would go with my team and go in the Iraqi tanks and see exactly what's being done in a mid-operation that we went with the 4th Infantry up in Taji, just northwest of Baghdad. And on that day of January 29th, 2006, we decided we'll go in the Iraqi tank. We didn't know it was going to be the very first in line of these 8 vehicles to go down this road. And we're going village by village by village for counterinsurgency tactics. And I was watching what they were doing. And we're driving down the road, and my cameraman, Doug Vogt, and I decided we're going to stand up outside of the tank and do a stand-up. And the trees are kind of getting closer, the palm trees on the side of this paved road. And the Iraqi driver apparently, I don't remember it, but he told Doug Vogt, my cameraman, he said, listen, you guys ought to get inside because I think this is looking like a more dangerous place. But it was within literally 3 seconds when that IED explosion blasted about 20 yards off to the left. We had a camera that was actually on the front of the vehicle, and Doug was holding his. And the video from that just dies before you see anything. The air blast of those things hit first. They completely knocked us out, followed by rocks and metal. I was here and Doug was on this side, and it completely shattered this part of my face down here, the jaw, my scapula and my back. We have body protection and helmets on with no chance in hell we'd be alive right now. The other ones went past me and hit Doug, knocked him out for a couple seconds on top of the tank. He could not really move. They finally ended up pulling him in. For me at that time, these other rocks and this metal went right in front of my left eye and planted themselves right here on this side of the nose. I'm actually blinded in 1/4 of my eyes in the upper right-hand corner of both of them because when I went back in, there was a damage from the blast to the left part of my brain. And so that nerve, the one nerve that then splits into two into the eyes was damaged. I was out. There's only 2 things that I remember when that happened. I remember that I was looking at the palm trees, the next thing I know, I'm seeing my body floating underneath me. When 1 minute I fell into the tank where I also hit my head, so I fell back in, and 1 minute later I woke up and I looked up and I saw Doug and Vinny Malhotra, my producer, and I said, "Are we alive?" And they said, "We're alive." That's the last thing I remember. But I know from what I was told is that blood was just pumping out of my neck. The amazing thing is there's actually one rock still in there. It's too close to the nerves, et cetera, to even take it out. It's like the size of a small marble. But another one, a large marble, went all the way past, after shattering this part of my jaw, went past all the veins and the arteries, past the esophagus, trachea, didn't pierce any of those, ended up on the carotid artery on the other side, 1 millimeter away from piercing through that. They took it off about a week later, thinking maybe the blood would come out if they took it off, and it didn't. Amazingly, I still lived. But here's the thing about one of the moments of this that I think every veteran out here, everyone who's seen the stories or shared stories with friends of yours who've lived through it, is the shocking thing is at that time, when we were hit, all the U.S. and Iraqi militia out there, the soldiers out there with us, they got out of the vehicles, and as soon as they got out, and this is another tactic of the insurgents, they used this, they all got out to get us, open fire in all 4 corners around us. They opened fire on all of our forces. These guys shot back. We don't know if they killed them, they ran, still don't know that to this day. But they got out, fired that down, got in the back, saved our lives, stopped the bleeding, got us in a Bradley, drove us a mile down the road. There was an Army helicopter that was wheeling in to save us. And they told us later, about 2 years later, I visited them out in Washington State, and they said that as they're coming in, the commander by radio told them not to land. It's too dangerous. Turned down the radio, volume, ignored it, came in and saved us. Doug and I were the only ones wounded, so we could both help, be put in this helicopter. And they took us down to Baghdad. We were stabilized miraculously. They already said, everybody, I talked to all my friends that were there in the tank with me that day, who are very close friends of mine to this day. This guy said, absolutely, we thought you were not going to live. We didn't think you were going to live another 5 minutes. But somehow I survived. And they stabilized me. Doug and I were there. Then they put us into another helicopter, which went up to Balad. Balad was there doing all the neurosurgery. They removed 16 centimeters of my skull because my brain has been so shaken around by the blast. It was expanding. So they gave me what's called a craniectomy, so they could take off that skull so the brain could go out, so the oxygen was not cut off, so the cells don't start dying. And if I did not have that, then there's no chance in hell I'd be here right now either. All the doctors always tell to me, well, we saved you because there's no malpractice over there, is what they said. They could do whatever they want. In fact, at that time in Balad, it's not even so much that, it's just that the guys that did this with me, that was the fourth one that day that they removed skulls from somebody, and they knew exactly what caused it, and they knew that the helicopters could get us in. If this happened in New York City, I don't think the ambulances could have gotten me to that as the helicopters did. It was 37 minutes after that blast. All of that, a mile down the road, 2 helicopters up there to start removing the skull off my head. That's miraculous. Here's another story. There's a guy named Omar who was the translator for us. He was the interpreter. He'd worked for the U.S. military for 4 years, first with the Marines, and then now he's with the Army. And he's the guy that stopped the bleeding of my neck inside that tank. About a year after this all happened, he had to flee out of Iraq into Syria because he was being targeted, because they now learned what he did. And so he fled, and we went to Damascus in 2007. We got him a green card. He now lives in Kentucky and just got a degree in film and now looking for a job. Amazing American dream, I have to tell you. So he is a superhero. So after all that happened, they got us back from Balad, then up to Langstuhl, where all of the wounded are coming from Iraq and Afghanistan through to get back to the United States, back to Bethesda Naval. And there I was for the next 5 weeks in a coma. And all of my family, my wife, my parents, my brothers, ABC, my close friends, but my wife was she was the commander, always has been and always will be. She's keeping only a few people are even allowed to come in and see what was really a horrific sight. She did not allow our little kids to come and see me for at least the first 3 weeks because she was like a muffin. She said coming out the part of my skull, the brain was so big coming out of it. And just all of this part, she said I'd been like dragged behind a car over the top of the pavement by 60 miles an hour, scrapping everything off the back parts. So I didn't want my kids to see that. You know, it's one of the amazing stories of the doctors, they all looked at me, and they looked at all of those on the 3rd floor of the ICU of the Bethesda Naval, where we're filled with a lot of Marines and Navies and Army as well, because these were dealing with all of the neurosurgery was in the Bethesda Naval, even if they're Army. And all of them there, and we were in horrible, horrible conditions. We'd not expected these kinds of wounds in these wars. There were going to be so huge numbers of them as this continued. And they didn't think I was going to wake up necessarily. They're getting no movement out of me. But it was on the 3rd week, while I'm still there, as my little daughter, Catherine, came up and saw me. And she played this little game in my ear we always did when I was covering wars and I was overseas and I wanted to spend time with them. I talked to them on the phone, helped them through their homework. And I'll do this little kissing game in our ears. I don't have time to explain it to you. But she did the little game into my ear. And apparently, for the first time, a little tear came out of my eye. An indication that maybe that I am live underneath. And that little girl is the one who, by the way, told me last night she's moving to Detroit. My little one. So at that moment, this is another major change in our lives, is that I woke up. But before I woke up, my wife, Lee, there on the 3rd floor, there's dozens of others in comas that served our country. And she'll never forget, as we're surrounded by our family, our friends, top doctor friends of ours even that were not even serving. There was one room of a Marine, and nobody was there. Nobody was there ever. Every once in a while, from his base, they'd come and visit. But he didn't have the family there. He did not have a company there. He didn't have family members there. And she said to this with her and her brother. My brother, by the way, lives here. They decided to put together a foundation to make sure that that does not happen. That we're not going to allow this to happen. We never thought in a million years that this would become as big as it's become. We've also already raised more than $25 million. We're vetting all of the existing more than 40,000 organizations around the country have been developed to try to help the veterans. A lot of people want to do something, but they don't know exactly where their money should go or where their efforts should go. So we became a team of vetting. Those that have lived in this world for a long time and know it better than anyone, and that's what we've done, to try to raise as much money as we possibly can. You know, when I woke up, I could not remember a single name of any country in the world. I could not remember the name of any state in our country. I didn't know exactly where Virginia was and where Maryland was and Washington, D.C. was. I knew I was somewhere and I knew I was awake. But I suffered, and still to this day, from what's known as aphasia, which means because of the brain, largely in the left part of my brain, was so shocked that I've lost a lot of words. So I know what I want to say, and I know what everyone's talking about, but just sometimes to come up with the word. So a lot of people say, well, you sound pretty much the same as you did back then. I said, no, I'm not. But it sounds that way because I can find a synonym for the points that I want to make. It's just names that are a real difficulty for me because there's no synonym for your name. So those are some of the problems that I still have. And my kids, so I had to take a different direction in my life as well. I'm still at ABC, I'm still reporting, I'm on the road all the time, and I loved reporting as I did my entire life. But we wanted to make sure that we could do everything we can for the veterans of this country. You know, mentioned earlier that I grew up here in Michigan, and our neighborhoods were filled with veterans that were drafted. You know, we don't have a draft right now. We have those that have joined up themselves for an army, for a force, for Marines, Navy, Air Force, National Guard, Coast Guard. Decided it's so that my son and my daughter don't have to join. They've lived through this with their father. They know the world well. Would they want to? That's up to them. They know what we've accomplished in these wars, how amazing that they've done to serve our country. Could they? Yes, they could, but they don't. None of us want to go back to what happened in Vietnam. We don't want to go back when they came off and were spat upon. They took off their uniforms and never want to even talk that they're veterans. The companies would hire them but didn't want to know the fact that they were. That is completely changing. Secondly, the skill level within the veterans now, after these wars, with multiple deployments. I know some that have been deployed largely special ops because of a shorter period of time. I know ones that have been on 14, 15, 16 deployments. So they not only have great discipline and experience, they've seen parts of the world that no one else has. And I know that very well. You know, we all have issues that come back. My topic, and I know that most of what you're talking about here is hiring veterans. A lot of veterans that are incredibly skilled with IT, with high-tech skills and everything else. There's also a small group that are also coming back with some kind of issues that they got out of the war, like mine. And I know there's a lot of hiring with that as well. What we have now discovered is that when we started our foundation, we concentrated a lot on what's happened to them when they're coming out of the ICU, where we first emerged, to make sure they're getting everything they can. And then when they come back to the community, to make sure that they're not forgotten there and they don't get lost in the middle of nowhere. Because there is literally well below 1%, more like 0.4% of Americans are serving in the war. So that's make sure they're still known. Now, we're concentrating a lot of long-term recovery in the sense that let's get them jobs. They want missions. Every one of, including me, I feel like it was not finished. All of my team that were with that unit that we were with, they stayed there where I was rushed back. Everybody I know that was wounded in these wars, they want to go back with that same team that they left behind because they did not finish their mission. You know, these guys want to go back and do it again. But they knew that they're going to go to another world. They're going to do it and try to have a mission. We have now found, now that we're concentrating on long-form employment, is that sometimes, and I think you said this earlier today, a lot of you did, that we found out that helping veterans is incredible therapy for everything. You know, it is a world that they understand better than anybody else, coming from within. You know, I still have things, but it's been the most amazing part of my life to be a different role than my grandfather and my father played within the military, and a more normal way. But now, in that sense, I am now within the military. I'm so honored to be part of that world because they're my closest friends now. I still have a loss of hearing. I lost about 30% of my hearing in my left ear, because of, that's like ear, eye, same thing, right? And it's like I always screw up like, Verizon and Viagra, same kind of words all twisted around. In fact, because I did lose that, now I remember this, since I lost some of my hearing, my wife and I did a little talk. We went back to London, to the American School in London, where our kids went when we were over there, and to do a little talk in this like auditorium. Looks like you're at a theater. And I said, well, at the end, I'll take some questions. And somebody in the back, I told them about how the China store, I spoke some Chinese, and at the end, she yells from the top up there, she says, how's your Mandarin? And I said, I'm sorry, what? She goes, how's your Mandarin? I said, how's my manhood? She said, no, how's your Mandarin? I said, oh, Mandarin. I said, yeah, both of those are in descent. So, these are, I think everybody you meet now, no one anticipated they would recover to the point that they did, because, there's anything great about these wars, especially. There's good things about the war. There's bad things about the wars. One of the good things about this war is the medical advancements that people are getting when they come back with the wounds. Like I said, they all say 3 years earlier, if we had this exact same battle, this IED explosion, I would not be alive. But the medical stuff is amazing. In the old days, coming back from Vietnam was 37 days on average to get somebody back when they're hit badly on the fields of Vietnam back to the United States. Now it's 72 hours on average, because they're able to get you back with different kinds of planes and the kinds of treatment that they have to get them back. So there's these horrific parts, but there's also miraculous parts about all of this. One last little thing about my daughter, Nora, because we have 2 twin daughters that are now 15, believe, which I can't. They were 5 years old when I was hit. Now they're 15. God, I hate puberty. But anyway, so little Nora, she was born with some deafness in her ears when we were living in London. And so she wore hearing aids. And she was like the most warm, cuddly thing. And she said, about 5 months after I came back, she said, Mom, Dad's face is got all these rocks and things in it. She goes, don't worry, those are going away. They're coming out like little pimples. And she said, and his back is all scarred, She goes, don't worry, sweetie, that's getting better too. And she said, but Mom, I got to tell you that in some ways I think Dad loves me even more than he did before. And I think that's the case. I think I have different thoughts about life and missions and fears of death and love, and I think that's one of the good things about what happened, and I think there's a lot of friends of mine who will tell the same thing. We like it to be back the way it was before, but I don't think they ever would have gotten, in other wars and other places, would get this kind of treatment, where Disney said, we're going to hire 1,000 veterans between 2012 and 2015. Did they hire 1,000? No, they raised more than 5,000 veterans in those 3 years. All right, listen, I'm a reporter. I have to tell you that Disney owns ABC News. But it's true. So this says you something. Every company I've known wants to hire them. You've heard that all day today, so I'm not going to tell it any more than that, but it's absolutely been the case. So every one of you, once you meet somebody or go to a place like this, you want to do more. You want to help them. You want to hire them. Or those of you who meet some that are wounded, you want to help them some way too. So my last little thing is, you guys got to come out to New York. November 10th this year, our big fundraising event. Springsteen's come back every 8 years in a row. Every big comedians from John Oliver and John Seinfeld. What's his first name again? Yeah, Jerry. All these big ones come out and do it, and you would just be blown away. Actually fill the first four rows of Madison Square Theater with all of those we've flown in from around the country, some of the worst wounded. And they sit there with their families and their spouses and the ones who saved, because those are the ones that really need to be treated with the greatest respect, because it's true that those of us that have been wounded, those that have been hit, those who have served, get all the credit and the attention, but it's the spouses and the family members and the kids the one to get the most care. So I just want to thank you for everything you're doing. You're a remarkable group. This is the third time I've come for this institute. And I think it keeps growing and growing, and there's so obvious reasons, because everyone out there knows that this is working, we owe it, and this is the greatest investment we can possibly make in our country. So thank you all very much.